Hospital Porter's Pride and Dignity, Stop the New World Order. Welcome to Hapanwo TV and welcome to this. A special program to mark a special anniversary. Yes, indeed. It's almost 20 years ago. Not quite, because I'm doing something else on the actual 20th anniversary. But it's almost 20 years ago since the Disclosure Project press conference. Ah, yes. That happened on May the 9th, 2001. Today's May the 4th. 2021. Yeah, almost 20 years. Oh, by the way, happy Star Wars Day. It's only just May the 4th, actually. I'm filming this quite late. But if you remember, something very interesting happened on May the 9th, 2001. Unfortunately, I wasn't really into UFOs in those days. But I sort of developed an interest during the next few years, actually. But Dr. Steven Greer of the Disclosure Project gathered together a group of witnesses in the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., USA, which is the primary, I think it's the central publicity area of the entire United States. And he called the world's media, and they went online. They went online, and they got the TV cameras out. They called in all the world's media, and a lot of them turned up, because they did in those days. A lot of them more turned up probably then than would turn up now, although hopefully that will change soon. And Dr. Greer introduced the event, and for the next 2 hours, witness after witness came forward and delivered their particular information, the information they had about aliens and UFOs. It's quite something. We'll be going into that press conference in a minute, but I just want to, first of all, give you a bit of background. Interesting, I know somebody, he's a guy who used to go to Probe, but when the Probe conference, before the Probe conferences ended, there's a guy who used to go there, and he was actually in the audience that day. I remember speaking to him about it. It was quite interesting. But I'll just give you a bit of background. I've managed to, obviously this was a long time ago, but there is some archived news reports about it, which I'm going to just go into one of them now. Okay, so I'm afraid when it comes to mainstream media, you can't do better or worse, depending on what your intention is, to go to the good old B, B, and C. Yes, this was actually archived on the BBC News website. Obviously, it's just like an old copy now in their archive. It's not archived. It's not on their main website, but it used to be, as you can see here. Thursday, May the 10th. It's the day afterwards, and it's how do we go? UFO spotters slam quote US cover up unquote. Not a good start. That's a bloody awful title. I think even by the BBC standards, that's a damn awful title. I mean, the attitude towards UFOs changed since this has happened, because of all the reasons I'll go into. But because of something else, obviously, that happened in 2001. But this is campaigners say the US government hides the truth about aliens. By the Washington correspondent Rob Watson. Oh my goodness me, he's probably close to being Director General now. Neil Armstrong was not the first being on the moon. That, at any rate, is the position of the suitably sci-fi sounding Project Disclosure that launched a campaign in Washington on Wednesday. It's called the Disclosure Project, not Project Disclosure. It is aimed at persuading... I should do my... That's not my BBC voice, is it? Hang on. Oh, yeah. It's aimed at persuading... That's my Guardian voice. Oh, sod it. I'll just tell you when I'm speaking and when I'm reading. It is aimed at persuading the US Congress to hold hearings on the existence of unidentified flying objects and extraterrestrials. The campaign believes that the US government has known about the existence of UFOs for over 50 years, but has been trying to hide it. Try 70 years now, mate. That's me speaking. Back to the text. Alien life forms, quote unquote. It was surely the strangest ever news conference hosted by Washington's august National Press Club. This is me talking now. I'm sure it was at the time, but of course since then we've had the disclosure, we've had the citizen hearing on ET disclosure, which you'll know very well because I've discussed it in detail. That was in 2013. I'll carry on. Donna Hare was just one of over 20 witnesses, most of them ex-military and all deadly serious. Among them was former Army Sergeant Clifford Stone, who said the US government has tried to suppress what he had seen one day in Pennsylvania back in 1969. I was involved in, this is Clifford Stone talking in quotes, I was involved in situations where we actually did recoveries of crashed saucers. There were bodies that were involved with some of these crashes. Also, some of them were alive, he said. While doing this, we were telling the American public there was nothing to it. We were telling the world there was nothing to it, Mr. Stone added. So what, we wondered, did they look like? Were these visitors from another world the antennaed, hideous, slime-trailing creatures of science fiction? You have individuals that look very much like you and myself, and they could walk among us. And you wouldn't even notice the difference, he said. In my opinion, they already do. He claimed to have catalogued 57 species of alien life forms. Aliens for peace. The brains behind Project Disclosure. They call it Project Disclosure again. That's got to be deliberate. That's got to be a deliberate mistake. He's a country doctor turned ambassador to outer space, Steven Greer. He says there are two reasons for the project. First, to persuade the US government to reveal the astonishing planet-saving technology he says it has picked up from super clever aliens. Super clever aliens. And second, to stop the Bush administration from annoying them by building weapons in space. We are not alone. There are life forms out there, which, while they are not hostile, have clearly shown they are not pleased with our tendency to put weapons in space, Mr. Greer said. It's Dr. Greer, not Mr. Greer. But he doesn't think it'll be tricky to walk into the White House and say to George W. Bush, don't go ahead with the missile defense, aliens don't like it. I don't think it's tricky at all. I think all these discussions have happened in covert circles. I think the decision has been made to weaponize space anyway, Mr. Greer added. True believers, that's what this paragraph is called. For the apparently very pro-alien audience, it was a news conference from heaven. One member of the audience said he believed people like Mr. Greer were much more than he believed. He said that he believed people like Mr. Greer much more than he believed the government. Oh, shock, horror! Oh my God! You mean you actually believe more somebody else than you believe the government? Why don't you believe the government? What's wrong with you? They're so honest. I know that major operators within the US government are big liars, he said. And when asked why extraterrestrials had not come down and talked to the people of the world themselves, he asked, if you got bombarded and shot down from the sky and mistreated, how would you behave? That's actually a good point, but that's me talking now. However, they have actually come down and spoken to people. You see, they have made contact in a limited state to certain people. The press conference just confirmed the beliefs of another audience member who said she has seen UFOs many times. How would she respond to people who think that the folks who believe in UFOs are crazy? They haven't seen them, and it's hard to believe anything unless you've experienced it, she said. And that really is the problem in a nutshell. Despite the impressive military credentials and undoubted sincerity of the witnesses, Congress is surely unlikely to move on their request for a hearing unless a spaceship lands on, or at least within sight, of Capitol Hill. That BBC article needs no further commentary from me, except that it was about as awful as I expected it to be. There are a few others that I could go into, but they're pretty much all the same. And so that there was a contemporary news article made at the time by the BBC, well, I think you know me better than just to believe that. I hope none of you are going to stop watching at this point. I mean, the whole article actually, the very title, UFO spotters, etc., is designed to put people off. They know that most people just read the title and the opening paragraph anyway, and so that's the point. But of course, if you do that. And I think if you're the kind of person who watches my channel, you're not the kind of person who will be satisfied and will suffice with that kind of attitude. You'll want to dig deeper, you'll want to know more. And of course you will want to know what the press conference actually was like. And the good news is it was filmed. It was filmed, definitely. And it was filmed in the press club, in the same room, incidentally, the big, I forgot what it's called now, I think it's called the Second Amendment room or something like that. It's the big hall, it's the largest room in the press club, which is exactly where 14 years later, 12 years later, the citizen hearing on ET disclosure took place, which I think you've seen. It's the one. I think you've seen my opinions on that. I've focused on that an awful lot. I covered it on Hapanwo Radio in great detail, including interviewing some of the organiser and some of the witnesses. So yeah, it was filmed, and it is the whole thing, 1 hour 55 minutes. It's all on YouTube, so you can watch it if you want. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a little dissection analysis of the proceedings. I've got the recording here. I'm going to go through it, and we're going to discuss the various points that were brought up. Now, I should point out that I have edited it for brevity. Now, the whole thing is 1 hour and 55 minutes. I pared it down to 28 minutes. Now, this, exactly like with my ayahuasca video, I'm not doing that to try and distort the message or trying to put words in people's mouths or take words out of people's mouths. My intention is simply to give you a snapshot, to quote Steven Greer, to give you the basic idea of what went on, the highlights. I think I've captured the highlights, and I want to preserve the points of all the witnesses, and I'll be addressing the points of all the witnesses at various timestamps. Now, my timestamp marker, what am I going to choose? What am I going to choose for my timestamp marker? I chose Terence McKenna for the ayahuasca one. Christy Winter's got a mooing of a cow, completely by accident, I should add. There was Professor Brian Cox for Steve Mumbling, the last one I did for Steve Mumbling. And now I've just got to add up my notes here. Excuse me a moment. And what am I going to choose for this particular one? Well, it's this.
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
Yes, indeed. It's UFO Jesus himself, Ryan Robbins, Post-Disclosure World. His channel is actually really good. So if you've not heard of him before, please do check out his channel, Post-Disclosure World, because it's very, very good. So let us go straight to the recording that I made, and the edited recording that I've made here. And it'll begin, of course, with UFO Jesus, just to enter. I put that at the beginning just for the sake of it.
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
The logo of the X-Files is "The Truth is Out There."
The guy you're actually listening to speaking is the MC, the guy who introduces the whole thing. The speakers all introduce themselves. Greer does an entry, then first the MC speaks, then Greer does the introduction, and he also does a summary at the end. The witnesses all introduce themselves just in a row. The guy here speaking is actually John Cypher, the actor, who you might have known from things such as he's been in many films, and he was in Hill Street Blues. He's quite old now. He hasn't been in anything for a while, I don't think. But he's actually the guy they chose to open this up.
The truth is out there. I'm going to paraphrase. The truth is in here.
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
Yeah, exactly. The truth is out there, the truth is in here. The X-Files, I mean, I'm glad. The X-Files, this was just when the X-Files had been on for a few years at this point, because this was 2001. It's odd, I look back at it now. I look back at the whole thing, and I feel quite nostalgic, believe it or not. I feel like it was a good time. It's just... Maybe that's just the way that we just see the past through rose-tinted glasses, When I was, of course, I'm not that young. I mean, I was alive back then. I was adult, and I wouldn't have said that about the present when it was present day. But I look back at it now and think how cool it was. But yeah, the truth is out there. The truth is in here, meaning in that room. The truth is also down here. The truth is already here. To quote the tagline, the motto of UFO Truth magazine, it's here on Earth with us. So Greer is now going to introduce the event.
Thank you very much, John. Members of the press, the American public and
Looking very dapper, is it? I mean, I'm not going to show any images from this. I mean, I've used some title shots. The title shot for this the actual illustration and thumbnail and title shot for this particular video is Greer at the lectern. He's got very neatly parted hair. He's in a nice suit. He's younger, of course. He'd be only like I think he'd be about 20 years ago. What is he now? 64, 65, something like that. He'd be about mid-40s. Looking very smart. You know, his glasses, looking very learned. Let him carry on.
people of the world.
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
Yeah, people of the world. Now, you may think he's being a bit immodest, and of course, it wouldn't be the first time Greer was immodest, would it? It's certainly not the last. Immodesty is not something he does very well. Sorry, I should say modesty is not something he does very well. It's certainly not It certainly is immodest, to use the double negative. But to be fair, this was actually the biggest live stream in history at that time. Bearing in mind this is 2001 and the World Wide Web had only been up for 5 years. But never before had a video been streamed online with that number of viewers. Of course, since then there's been many, many more, which far exceed this Disclosure Project press conference. But I must admit, it was an achievement for Greer. It was a huge achievement.
We are here today to disclose the truth about a subject that has been ridiculed and questioned, denied for at least 50 years.
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
Now, of course, this is where it gets very poignant when we look back at it, because of course it's 50 years. It's actually over 70 years now, probably earlier. I mean, I've done videos about how Roswell was not the first Roswell, about Nikola Tesla, about how the free energy cover-up predates Roswell by its own half century. So it's way longer than 50 years. It's way longer than 70 years, and that's the sad thing. And I wonder, of course, looking back at it now, everyone was so hopeful. I'll say more at the end about this, but everyone was hopeful. Everyone just saw this as the start of something so great, without knowing that it was actually nothing of the sort. In a way, it was kind of a deathbed gathering, but not permanently. Hope has been resurrected from the grave that was dug for it in that year of 2001. I will say more at the end of this. Let me continue. Let Mr. Dr. Greer continue. I don't want to. The BBC call him Mr. Greer.
In 1993, a group of military advisors to this project and I met out in the countryside in Virginia. And we decided that it was time for civilians, military, intelligence, and other people to come together to disclose the truth about the subject which is called UFOs. Since that time, I have personally briefed a sitting Director of Central Intelligence, James Woolsey, President Clinton's first CI director. I have personally briefed the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, the head of Intelligence Joint Staff, members of the Senate Intelligence Committee, many members of Congress, members of the European leadership, the Japanese cabinet, and others. And what I have found is that none of them are surprised that this is true, but they are uniformly horrified that they have not had access to these projects.
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
Now, it's interesting that Greer says this, because at the time he said this, the Skeppers used to say he was making it up. They said he never briefed anyone. This was all his own fantasy. Now, since he said this, and he's been doing this since 1993, as he explained, it has been corroborated. And Kit Green, look at what Kit Green's been talking about, Admiral Thomas Wilson, the Wilson memo and things like that, which essentially, the Wilson memo is essentially, it describes the same meeting in which he was there with Leslie Kean and with Dr. Edgar Mitchell, way all those times ago in the early 90s. Now, as far as the lack of surprise, now, again, you know my views on the general disclosure issue. I mean, how feasible is willing disclosure? I mean, the whole point of my book, this book I wrote here, and it's, hang on, and its sequels. I should have got this out. Sure, I should have prepped my props. Roswell Rising, a novel of disclosure, by Ben Emlyn Jones, available at all good bookshops now. The reason I wrote that book and its two sequels was to describe in fictional form, in the form of a story, just imaginary, as an allegory, my whole mixed feelings and my whole internal division over the whole willing disclosure process. I think for Greer and for people like Steve Bassett, they see it as being a kind of one-way street, and I think it's going to. I think if willing disclosure is possible, it's going to be something far more convoluted. I think the road to willing disclosure is going to be tortuous. It's going to be twisted. But we are heading down that road now. But it's not going to be an easy task. It's not going to be over quickly. But the lack of surprise that these heads of state show may be because they all know to a lesser or greater degree already. Some of them will have an inkling at least. Not all of them will be in the loop. Obviously, as I think when Richard D. Hall tackled David Cameron at his hustings, I think he revealed that Cameron is not one of these people who's in the know. He probably knows less than you and me. And there are probably many government leaders like that. Others, we mentioned Bush. This is during the George W. Bush administration, but of course, Bush Sr. was also president. He's an exception. He seems to be someone who's in the know, and indeed we're going to talk about that later. But it's the fact that they said, they outraged they didn't know. Maybe some of it was genuine. Others, it might have been just to put Greer off his guard. I don't know. You see, Dr. Greer, he's not as worldly wise as he thinks he is. And, I give him a hard time. And I'm not going to... If I have some criticisms of him, I'm going to say so. But let him continue.
And these are folks who have been involved in so-called black budget or covert unacknowledged projects. These unacknowledged special access projects are taking in at least $40 to $80 billion per year.
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
Yeah, the black budget. Now, the black budget exists. If you get hold of the government inventory spending, which is published, and anyone can get hold of it, and you can do the maths yourself. Nick Cook did this. If you work out every single project and the entire exchequer donation basically to the Department of Defense, you'll find there's actually, you get a little bit left over. If you add up all the different white world public projects and you put them together, you get a different figure than when you see the gross total for what the Department of Defense costs for the year. That's that difference is the black budget. Indeed, there's a lot more. Besides, the 80 billion has gone up considerably. Not amazingly. I think it was a few months later on September the 10th, the day before the big day of that year, Rumsfeld said, we've lost $2.8 trillion. Trillion dollars, not billion, trillion. A trillion is 1,000 billion. And we just lost them. Did he leave his wallet on the bus? Should be a bit of a question. But then, of course, the next day, everyone forgot all about that. Talk about a date of very bad news. The government has other ways of raising funds to cover these black projects. And unfortunately, a lot of it is criminal. A lot of it involves a lot of suffering, a lot of pain. For example, the narcotics, the drug barons and things like that, the heroin, cocaine, things like that. That's a big subject. Other people have covered that in detail. But that's how they raise a lot of their money. They raise it through broken lives on the streets, people with drug addictions. So let Dr. Greer continue.
And they are sitting on technologies that can change the world forever. It has the most profound implications for the human future, for the U.S. national security, and for world peace. Specifically, technologies connected to UFO and extraterrestrial vehicles, if declassified and used for peaceful energy generation and propulsion, would solve the looming energy crisis definitively, would end global warming, would correct the environmental challenges that the Earth is facing.
even though I am without question a believer in UFO reality.
Yeah, of course, I don't need to reiterate my own position on these, which I go along with exactly what he said. I mean, check out the link in the description box. I've created an entire portal of this whole issue to do with in fact, I might even add another link, actually, the free energy link. I've created an entire portal related to UFO disclosure. The global warming thing, I don't agree with, but when it comes to environmental damage, that is real. And there are many, many forms of environmental damage which are genuinely a serious threat. And he's absolutely right. I mean, disclosure, especially when it comes to UFOs, especially the energy issue, but also other associated works, as I describe in my book, would solve most of the problems that civilization has generated. Civilization now being the central problem of planet Earth, partly really because of the Illuminati, because that's the way the Illuminati have wanted it, basically. And that's why disclosure is actually anathema. It is contradictory to the New World Order. They are chalk and cheese. They are oil and water. You cannot have one and the other together. They are completely, they are literally mutually exclusive, which is why if we ever got disclosure with a capital D, that's it for the New World Order. And I know some people disagree with that. I personally don't, and I'm happy to debate you if you think otherwise.
We can establish through this testimony that these objects of extraterrestrial origin have been tracked on radar going thousands of miles per hour, stopping and making right-hand turns, that they use anti-gravity propulsion systems, which we have already figured out how they work in classified projects in the United States, Great Britain, and elsewhere, that these objects have landed on terra firma, at times have been disabled, and have been retrieved specifically by teams within the United States, that extraterrestrial life forms have been retrieved and their vehicles have been taken and studied thoroughly for at least 50 years.
Even though I am without question a believer in UFO reality.
Well, this is kind of my speciality, isn't it? It's just obviously true. I can't really add or subtract anything from that except to say that is the case. It has happened. There is decisive physical evidence of the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence, and it is interacting with the human race. And this is what Richard Dolan calls the red line when he was in his black pill video, as I described in my recent UFO disclosure video. But yeah, I mean, there's absolutely no doubt about it. So I disagree with Greer on a lot, but I mean, our basic premise, our basic motivations here are the same. I think he's going the wrong way about it in many ways. I'm not as anti-Greer as some people, but I am a critic of his in many ways. I'll let him continue.
There is no evidence, I wish to emphasize, that these life forms from elsewhere are hostile towards us.
Even though I am without question a believer in UFO reality.
Yes, yes, there is evidence. This is an important point. And this is something that Greer has never managed to get the grips with, as you may have seen in his famous debate with Kerry Cassidy. Well, it was like all-out war. I mean, if you like internet blood sports, that's a really, really great thing to watch. It's quite amusing, actually. The clash of the titans, the two biggest egos in ufology go head-to-head. Oh, but I'll tell you what, it is the prize fighting of internet blood sports. But Kerry is actually quite right, and Greer is completely wrong. Because Kerry actually wrote an article on her blog about Greer's speech in which she took him to task, quite rightly, for some things he said for sure incorrect. Now, the good news is that the majority of extraterrestrials are not doing us harm. Nearly all of them, in fact, seem to be neutrally detached observers. There are a few actually who seem to be genuinely benevolent. Of course, Mary Rodwell and other people have brought these up. There are a minority, though, that do seem to do us harm. People have died and have been severely injured, mentally and physically, by their interactions with extraterrestrials. And I could go into that in more detail. I have gone into that in more detail. So have other researchers. The mutilation phenomenon, for example, abduction, very negative abduction, things like that, you see. So this is something I've always disagreed with, and I always have done. And I don't understand. He just seems to think aliens are all good. The only bad guys on the blocks are humans, which is, to me, it's incredibly naive.
But there is a great deal of evidence that they are concerned with our hostility.
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
Well, that's true. They are, you see. I'll give you more details later about that, because that does come up in this press conference.
The men and women who will speak next will do so in order, beginning on your left. They will introduce themselves.
My name is John Callahan. I'm a retired FAA employee. I was the division manager for the Accidents Evaluation and Investigation Division in D.C. About 2 years before I retired, I received a call from Alaska region. He says about the UFO. The next day, my immediate boss, service director, Harvey Safir, and I went to Atlantic City. I just briefed the administrator, Admiral Ingen, on what happened. He wanted a 5-minute briefing. After we started the briefing, he wanted to know if he could see the video. We put the video on. He watched the video, the whole video. 3 men from Reagan's scientific staff, 3 CIA people, 3 FBI people, and I don't remember who the other guys were, along with all the FAA experts that I brought with me that could decide or talk about the hardware and the software, how it worked. When it was all done, the CIA, one of the CIA men told the people they were now sworn to secrecy, that this meeting never happened and this event never happened. When I asked him why, I thought it was probably just a stealth bomber at the time. He says, well, this is the first time that we have recorded radar data on a UFO. And
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
I doubt if that's the first time. In fact, from what I've heard from other witnesses, that's not the first time UFOs have been captured on radar. However, it's interesting with Callahan. He's a level-headed professional man, does a responsible job, and he had a remarkable experience because some pilots in U.S. airspace had a remarkable experience. He tried to deal with this, and he, from the very highest level of the intelligence agencies, they intervened and took over. And as you just heard, he was at this meeting, and there's a video of all. He's got all the details. He's got all the data. At this conference, he shows you, I won't play it, but he shows you the documents. And the CIA just basically, it's a classic thing. You never saw anything, thing like that. I'll let him carry on.
I said, well, you're going to tell the public about it. And he says, no, we don't tell the public about this. It would panic the public. He says, we're going to go back and study this.
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
I think it shows you. I mean, I think it shows you the contempt by which the political classes view the majority of people when they have this attitude that it's like. I mean, there's many ways they show contempt for us. One of them is they seem to regard us as children. They treat us like bloody children. I mean, it's like nothing out. If anything out of the ordinary happens, we just panic. But most people don't. You see, it's like. Think of the things we've had to deal with in the past. In my own country, the Blitz, rationing during World War II. The British people dealt with World War II with an enormous level of stoicism and courage. We had the bombs dropping on us. We had a lack of food. We had to spend time in bomb shelters. We had our husbands and our brothers and our sons going off to foreign fields to die. And we faced it with enormous bravery. Yet, again and again and again, we're actually remarkable. I'm proud to be human. Humans are amazing things. But the government just said, oh, you tell them anything, they'll just panic. It's like Margaret Thatcher. I mean, Margaret Thatcher allegedly told Georgina Bruni, and it's the title of her famous book on the Rendlesham Forest incident, you can't tell the people. They literally think they're kindergarten nannies looking after a bunch of frightened little kids. And I think it's even worse than that. As I said in my last video, they think we're bloody farm animals. They're scared, there's a wolf in the pen, we're just going to stampede. I mean, for goodness sake. No, they loathe us. They look down on us. And, of course, at a higher level, it's about control. It's about making the world in their image and keeping information from us that gets in the way of that agenda?
I have with me the voice tapes of the controllers that were involved, the FAA original tapes. See, after we handed this stuff off to the president's staff, the FAA didn't know what to do with it. We don't separate UFOs from real traffic, so it's not our problem, okay?
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
That's interesting, actually, when you consider the famous scene in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Steven Spielberg's classic UFO movie. Do you remember one of the opening scenes, early scene in the film? There's a scene in an air traffic control room where a group of controllers are speaking to a pilot of an airliner, and they ask him, "Do you want to report a UFO?" And eventually they had to repeat the question several times, and eventually he said negative. So I wonder. See, Spielberg did his homework for that movie. You can see, actually, if you study the UFO phenomenon, Steven Spielberg knew an awful lot about UFOs. He actually consulted J. Allen Hynek, and Hynek appears as in a famous cameo in the film. And so it's amazing where you get these ideas from, because that sort of thing has actually happened. And of course, this conflict between the FAA, which is the Federal Aviation Administration, which deals with civil aviation, it's like the Civil Aviation Authority in Britain, and the need for military and government operations clashes at times. And what Callahan has revealed is one of those occasions.
I have a copy of the original of the video that we took, which is rather interesting.
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
Yeah, this is the video. Has anyone seen this video, incidentally? I mean, this was 20 years ago. I mean, I started thinking to myself, well, if there's a video of the meeting, is it published? I mean, what's Callahan done with it? Is it part of the this famous dead man's trigger that Greer is supposed to have? Is it carried around in a briefcase with a handcuff connected to the wrist of the guy carrying it, one of Greer's bodyguards? I don't know. If you've seen Callahan's meeting of the video, if you've seen Callahan's video of the meeting, could you let me know? Because I'd like to see it. So, yeah, it's all there. This is evidence that was talked about at the press club. He holds up the tapes. There's an old VHS tape and a cassette tape. And he also holds up some documents. But I don't, unless it passed me by and and it just went away, it wasn't that interesting, I don't know.
And it's called the UFO incident. Japan 1648, I believe the number was, it happened on November the 18th, 1986. I'm prepared to go to Congress, to swear before Congress that everything I've told you people and everything that is here is the truth. Thank you.
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
You're right. The Japan Aliens 1628, yeah, this is a very famous one. This is a UFO event which occurred 17th of November 1986, as Callahan just said. There was basically a long-distance cargo aircraft operated by Japan Airlines. It was going from Paris to Tokyo. And there were 3 crew members in the cockpit at the time, including Captain Kenju Terauchi. And what they report is remarkable. Several objects, rectangular arrays, closing on the aircraft very close by, and a third object which is enormous. You may have seen the famous picture. Terauchi drew a picture of it, and it's something at least 20 times the size of his aircraft. And his aircraft was a Boeing 747. It's something, again, you've got to ask yourself, if UFOs don't exist, why do things like this keep happening over and over again, continuously, all the time, every day?
My name is Charles L. Brown. I'm a Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Air Force, retired, subsequently 7 years with the Foreign Service. During World War II, I was a young farm boy from West Virginia. I got the patriotic bug, joined the United States Army, ended up flying bombers in Europe. Finished college in the late summer of '49, recalled to active duty in the newly formed United States Air Force. I was assigned to an organization called Office of Special Investigations.
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
The Air Force Office of Special Investigations. Now, this is where Richard Doty was a member of that too, and that's a story in itself, isn't it? But this Charlie Brown, he likes being called Charlie Brown, incidentally. He says that he enjoys being associated with that cartoon character because he really likes the cartoon series. But I wonder where he is now. I mean, he's pretty old at this conference when he did this conference 20 years ago, so I'm guessing he's no longer with us. It's several people actually who attended this press conference have since died. Clifford Stone, Mark McCandlish, etc., etc. And it's a shame that they maybe didn't see their efforts bear fruit as soon as perhaps they should have. But yeah, basically, he's not your average loony, is he? He was a fighter. He flew bombers in World War II. He was involved with intelligence in the post-World War II era. College educated. He's not like me. I suppose maybe I'm sort of low-hanging fruit for the skeptics, but this guy is right at the top of the tree, like all these witnesses.
Needless to say, starting in '47, UFOs were rather new. The Air Force Air Technical Intelligence Center was at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and I had my office in a building adjacent to it.
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
UFOs were not actually new in 1947. 1947 is kind of the beginning of the modern UFO era. So he's partly right, because that's when it sort of entered there was a huge global flap in the late 1940s. I think it's connected possibly to the detonation of the first nuclear bombs. As the late great Jim Marrs said, "Oh my God, the kids have found the matches." And so there was a great increase in UFO sightings, which has continued to this day. But of course, UFOs did exist before then, and I've covered that in quite detail, in enormous detail, on this channel. I've explained it several times in some of my other publications, on Hapanwo Voice and on Hapanwo Radio, UFO Truth Magazine, etc. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. This is very interesting because people talk. I was actually someone was talking about this on Facebook the other day, saying, "Oh, maybe everyone thinks that the aliens are going to be at Area 51, but what if they're not really there? What if maybe if that's just the message they give out to send people to the wrong place? All the alien spotters, UFO spotters, to quote the BBC's patronising language, all the UFO spotters go to Area 51 when the real alien stuff is elsewhere." Well, that's always a possibility. I concede. However, it's quite likely that if there's some extraterrestrial projects, it's spread out of several different locations. There's several different locations which deal with it. Now, one of the other alternative locations to Area 51 is Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. It was called Wright Field, it was called in 1947, because it was the home of the technical data section. And I do recommend the books by Dr. Irena Scott, which I've talked about many, many times, because she has written great detail about her work at the Battelle Memorial Institute, handling extraterrestrial material, and how it relates to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So, yeah, it's no surprising that someone in that position would end up there.
The project name was known as Project Grudge. It was a predecessor to a project known as Blue Book, which Ed Ruppelt headed. During my experience with it, I would collect the data I didn't collect it, it was sent into my office. I analyzed it. As a pilot investigator, I was able to offer some bits of advice to the Air Technical Intelligence people. I became clearly convinced that there was substance to what was being reported, in that we had ground visual, ground radar, airborne visual, and airborne radar confirmation of some of these sightings. The individuals who made the sightings were everything from airline pilots, military pilots, police officers, some of the people that your lives depend upon on a daily basis.
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
Oh, and that means hospital porters too then, doesn't it? Yes. Again, it's he gave a list of people who do very responsible things. And this point is reiterated several times in the press conference, especially at the end, when one of the reporters asks about this. These are licensed individuals, people who have state licenses to practice what they do in terms of law, medicine, flying, piloting, and things like that. So again, not loonies, not the people who you'd find on some dark hillside with a tinfoil hat on their head, pointing a camera at the sky, trying to capture these things like Win Keach, Funny, Win Keach is a pilot, so again, even the people who look like loonies and the skeptics take the mickey out of are not, exactly. See what I mean? So the skeptics, this is how the skeptics' popular image of us, the way they portray us, is false. It is propaganda.
These vehicles have been seen and confirmed all over the planet. I am willing to sign a sworn statement or testify to my judgment and to what I have observed. Such things do exist. Please believe me. Please believe those who follow me. Thank you.
My name is Michael
God bless you, Charlie Brown. That'd be a good cartoon, wouldn't it?
Smith. I was in the Air Force, a sergeant from 1967 to 1973. I was aircraft control and warning operator. While I was assigned to Klamath Falls, Oregon, in early 1970, I arrived at the radar site and they were watching a UFO on a radar that was hovering at about 80,000 feet. It sat there for about 10 minutes and then slowly descended until it dropped off the radar. It was gone for about 5-10 minutes and then instantly reappeared at 80,000 feet, stationary. When I found out what you normally do when you see a UFO, I was told that you notify NORAD, you don't necessarily write anything down, you don't write anything down, and you keep it to yourself. It's a need-to-know basis only.
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
Well, this is a typical story. This is what you hear over and over again, these types of stories. You have, it's a typical, in a sense, detection, UFOs detected by airspace monitors. The personnel involved try to deal with it, and the response from the authorities breaches normal procedures, like say nothing. Say nothing, nothing's on the radar, just report nothing's on the radar. Interesting, some people said, how come military pilots are the people most likely to be UFO witnesses? And the answer is because they're the people involved in defending airspace. They're the people who have to deal on a daily basis as part of their job, the security of a nation's airspace. Therefore, pilots, radar operators, and other people involved in that are often the first people to see UFOs, because UFOs are airspace invaders, and they're detected very often, and they are, and then they're dealt with. This is why that's the majority of people at this press conference were in those roles.
Good morning. My name is Enrique Colbeck. I am a traffic controller. For example, March 4, 1992, we detected 15 objects west side of the Toluca airport, that is very close of our international airport at 50 miles, more or less. We have almost a collision or something that we can name in that way with an international flight, domestic flight of Aeromexico 129, commanded by the pilot Raimundo Cervantes Ruano.
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
I hope you understood what he said. He's got a strong Mexican accent, this guy. But he names names. He's got the name. The pilot is obviously willing to go public because he names the pilot. What you're referring to there, of course, is a collision, a possible collision. Now, this is the fact is that UFOs are a hazard to air travel, no matter what they are. Anything unidentified that is flying, whatever it might be, even if it's just some normal object like a balloon, is a hazard to air travel, which is why you get people like Mr. Callahan and Mr. Colbeck involved in it, as well as the defenders of airspace, the military defenders of airspace. You have like the civilian air traffic control and people like that often also are at the cutting edge of this particular subject, because simply it's not because they have an existing interest. Most of them don't. It's because the phenomenon is real, and it invariably they end up having to deal with it. It's just, if the phenomenon wasn't real, this wouldn't happen. Don't you understand that, skeptics? Do you not understand? Don't you want to see how the very existence of these people contradicts your entire worldview?
My name is Dan Willis. I was in the United States Navy. I held a top secret crypto level 14 extra sensitive material handling security clearance. I worked in the code room at the Naval Communications Station in San Francisco. In 1969, I received a priority message from a ship near Alaska that was classified as secret. The ship reported emerging out of the ocean near port bow, a brightly glowing reddish-orange elliptical object, approximately 70 feet in diameter, emerged out of the water, shot into space, traveling at about 7,000 miles per hour. This was tracked on ship's radar and substantiated.
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
Now that again is a USO, an unidentified submergible or submerged object. And again, this is very similar to what we've seen with the Nimitz, the Tic Tac footage and things like that, where there's this object under the surface that is reported, where seagulls are gathering and things like that, and there's the Tic Tac above it, which David Fravor talks about. Bear in mind, these incidents with the Nimitz are actually quite old, and they actually happened just 3 years after this press conference. So they happened much closer to the time of this press conference than they did to 2017 when they emerged. But USOs have been reported almost as much as UFOs. They're seen by sailors at sea, as you said. You know that Bill Cooper, the author of Behold the Pale Horse, classic conspiracy book, he was in the US Navy. He was actually on a surface submarine, USS Tyru, cruising on the surface across the Pacific. Object came out of the water exactly as Mr. Ellis has just described it, in a very, very similar way. I mean, there's Christopher Columbus even reported seeing one on his famous voyage to supposedly discover America, although he knew where he was going, but that's a story for another time. The word you often get now is transmedium, because it appears that USOs and UFOs usually are the same thing, because one can often become the other. The one that Bill Cooper saw was a USO that became a UFO. If you hadn't seen it come out of the water, it would just be called a UFO.
My name is Don Phillips. I was in the United States Air Force and had worked with certain intelligence agencies of the United States government. Prior to my Air Force, prior to joining the Air Force, I worked for the famous Lockheed Skunk Works. And that I came in on the end of the U-2 project. My main project was known later as the SR-71. Now these SR-71s, as we know them, the Blackbird, are the type of aircraft that are still classified in a sense as far as the altitude that it flies at and also the speed records that it holds. Aircraft, the predecessor aircraft, there's strong evidence to suggest that perhaps these aircraft had a different role once in the air, monitoring some type of traffic to and from planet Earth.
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
I wonder, that's Don Phillips, not to be confused with the paranormal investigator, who was at the Skunk Works, connected to the military-industrial complex. The presence of the kind of contracting out of this whole thing, UFO, crash retrieval, cover-up, truth embargo thing, it's something that I'll deal with again later on. But he talks here about aircraft. He mentions the spy aircraft he was working on, which were flown at Area 51. That's not a secret. That's now been revealed. But he talks about other aircraft that had different roles, and he specifically for monitoring UFO activity. And it's possible, although he didn't actually say it. Obviously, I pared down his testimony, but even if you watch the whole thing, you'll see it. He doesn't actually say that these are space planes. These are actually craft that are aeroplanes, and when they reach a certain height, they become spacecraft. Because then you may get into the area of Gary McKinnon, what he discovered about the secret space program. And I do wonder what Mr. Phillips actually knows about that. And possibly there's things he can't say at this particular juncture. Maybe he could say something since 20 years later. It's about time. I expect it really is about time. But it's interesting when you get these people speaking out from that kind of level. So a person in the Lockheed Martin field. I mean, there's other guys. Ben Rich of Lockheed Martin. He just said we got the power to take ET home. Which, in other words, he's saying. I mean, that might be a slight exaggeration, but he's saying that they are building spacecraft independent of NASA and other space agencies. That's quite remarkable. I mean, if you want to see this entire press conference, it's on YouTube. Just put in Disclosure Project Press Conference 2001. It's about the third one down.
My name is Robert Solis. Contrary to what it says on the card, I was not a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. I was in the Air Force active duty after I graduated from the Air Force Academy in 1964 until 1971 and separated as a captain. In March of 1967, I was stationed at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana, as a missile launch officer, Minuteman missiles, on an early morning of March 16th, 1967.
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
Now, Captain Salas's story is very famous. I've covered it before. Interesting, I met Captain Salas once at the UFO Truth magazine conference. Yeah, it's a famous story. Now, basically, he was at his missile launching center at the near Malmstrom Air Force Base in a remote area of the countryside, because these things are all spread out so they can't be targeted. And basically, UFO appeared outside the gate. A red light appeared. The security guards, because he's in an underground bunker, the security guards on the surface reported this red light. And then he looks at his control panel. He sees the missiles in his field, in this area which he's responsible for, that are spread out over a wide area. But he sees them just switching off. It seems to be a result of the presence of these UFOs. It was quite difficult, actually, to get them going again afterwards. Now, this is where I ask the skeptics, if any of you are watching, and I know some of you do watch, some of you comment, you need to think twice before you open your mouths, because you really do make fools of yourself sometimes. You really do. Stephen Hawking, the famous physicist who recently died, or maybe he died earlier on, depending on which one I'm talking about, he once commented on UFOs. He was he through his electronic voice box, if it was him and not someone else programming it. He said literally, I dismiss the concept of UFOs because they're only seen by cranks and weirdos. He's very skeptical about the existence of UFOs. Now, Captain Salas is not a crank and he's not a weirdo. He's a member of a profession who by its very nature means that he can't be a crank and a weirdo. He has his psychiatric health more carefully monitored and screened than anyone else in the world, because the job Captain Salas did was, as I said, to launch the control station. He was on these control station duty, and if an order came through, his job was to launch these intercontinental strategic nuclear missiles. In the event of an all-out nuclear war, it was his finger on the button. He was at the end of the chain of command who would send the missiles on his way. If at any time he launched his missiles, I know he couldn't do them on his own. He needed the cooperation of his someone else. They always have at least two people in these control centres for that reason. But supposing they both lost their minds, they both went crazy, and they decided to launch their missiles. If they both lost their mind, right, the country being targeted would most likely shoot back before asking any questions. And that could easily result in an all-out exchange, which could destroy the world forever. Who would let a crank or a weirdo do a job like that? Please, skeptics, for goodness sake, just remember, if you could hear yourself sometimes, you have the introspection of a gnat. Funny, because Dr. Greer said at the beginning of this particular event, he said that the aliens were concerned about our own tendencies towards warfare. We are the human aggression, especially about how it concerns. I think they seem to be concerned about our own aggression, our own natural aggression, and how it affects them, because they seem to be particularly bothered about nuclear missiles in space. You know about Bob Jacobs, Dr. Bob Jacobs, and his story about, in the film UFOs and Nukes. I mean, Greer's wrong about the aliens all being nice guys, but some of them obviously are concerned. I mean, they said they're monitoring us and they're worried about what we will do, I think, if we ever get the chance to get off this world. And you see here, this is where aliens directly intervene with UFO event. And of course, there's many other examples of UFOs. If there's something we can discern from their behaviour, they do seem to have an interest in our nuclear weapons capabilities. I myself took a photograph of a nuclear base once when I was on holiday, just walking in Scotland. I wasn't into UFOs in those days. This was in the late 90s. I took a photograph, and a UFO appeared in the print. I've done entire videos on that. I've still got the print. I haven't got the negative, unfortunately. But the other example, of course, Rendlesham Forest. Let's continue.
Good morning. My name is Carl Wolf, and I was a precision electronics photographic repairman with a top secret crypto clearance in the United States Air Force. I was stationed at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. In 1965, in mid-1965, I was loaned to the Lunar Orbiter Project at NASA. I was interested in how the whole process functioned, how the data got from the Lunar Orbiter to the laboratory. I asked the young man if he'd describe the process to me. He did. About 30 minutes into the process, he said to me, in a very distressed way, by the way, we've discovered a base on the backside of the moon. And then he proceeded to put photographs down in front of me, and clearly in these photographs were structures, mushroom-shaped buildings, spherical buildings, and towers. Then I remember going home and naively thinking, I can't wait to hear about this on the evening news.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Donna Hare, and I worked at Philco Ford Aerospace from 1967 to 1981. During that time, I was a design illustrator, draftsman. I did the launch slides and landing slides, and also projection plotting boards, lunar maps for NASA. And I walked into a photo lab, which was the NASA lab across the hallway. At the time, I was talking to one of the techs in there, and he drew my attention to a photograph, a NASA photograph. It had a dot on it, and I said, what is that? Well, he drew my attention to it, and I said, is that a dot on the emulsion? And he said, and he's smiling, and he has his hands crossed, and he said, round dots on the emulsion don't leave round shadows on the ground. And this was an aerial photograph of the Earth, I'm assuming the Earth, because it had pine trees on it, and the shadows of the craft, or whatever it was, were in the same angle as the trees. And by its very nature, UFO, and I wanted to clarify that to a gentleman that was talking to me, means unidentified. So I did not know what this was. But I realized at this point that it's very secret, that it was kept secret, because I asked him, what are you going to do with this piece of information? And he said, we always airbrush these out before we sell them to the public. A guard told me that he was asked to burn some photographs and not to look at them. And there was another guard guarding him, who was in green fatigues, watching him burn the photographs. And he said he was too tempted. He looked at one, and it was a picture of a UFO, and he was very descriptive. I can go into that later with anyone. He immediately was hit in the head, and he had a big gash in his forehead. He was knocked out, and he's terrified, so he would have to be protected.
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
Now, these two people, Carl Wolf and Donna Hare, their testimony is backed up by each other. They're both involved with NASA. They both report strange things being depicted. Wolf reports, who sadly he died a couple of years ago, reports things being found in space, and Donna Hare describes the cover-up in detail of those things. Carl Wolf says, I can't wait to hear about this when I go home and switch on the TV for the evening news. And of course, he doesn't, and the reason is because of what Donna Hare describes. And of course, a lot of people have gone out, they've looked at all the pictures of space, they've tried to find the airbrushing. Some people claim they've actually found the airbrushing marks. Who knows? But it's if you deny there's a truth embargo, well, there it is. But it's interesting about the moon. Now, the dark side of the moon, what's on there. Now, the dark side of the moon, of course, is a great album by Pink Floyd. But it's also the popular name for the far side of the moon, which is more scientifically accurate. As you know, the Chang'e probe, the Chinese probe, actually landed there. And they didn't report anything, which could be because China's involved in this cover-up. But whether you call it the dark side or the far side of the moon, it's a very unusual place, because it's actually one of the few places in the universe that is completely invisible from the Earth for another reason other than sheer distance. And on a cosmic scale, it's very close indeed. It's the nearest object to the Earth, a natural object. It's our natural satellite. It's also very large. It's 7.3 million square miles of real estate, completely invisible from the Earth, cosmically speaking, right next door. It's the ideal place to operate from space onto the Earth without being seen. It would be a perfect place to locate a secret space program operation or a space operation by visiting extraterrestrials. If they come from a long way off, they're going to need to... They probably come in a large ship, which will need somewhere to dock. They probably have some kind of facility close to the Earth, and the dark or far side of the moon is perfect. So we can anticipate on theoretical grounds, if there were aliens visiting us, they probably would put something in that location. It'd be a shame to waste those 7.3 million square miles. No one could see it from there. Only a handful of people. Nobody's ever been there, well, even if you believe the official Apollo story. There's been no manned missions to that part of the world. There's been only one soft land. The moon, I mean. There's only been one soft landing, which was the Chang'e probe. Only a handful of photographs, the lunar orbiter, the lunar probes from Russia, and then the lunar orbiter probes from America in the 60s. So not a lot. And then, of course, if you believe it, the Apollo missions went round the moon as well. But there you have it. Their story is absolutely incredible. And again, it sort of backs up what Gary McKinnon talks about, the non-terrestrial officers. Maybe those mushroom-shaped buildings and those other things that Carl Wolf saw in that photograph that he saw and shouldn't have seen were where the non-terrestrial officers live. But are they human or are they alien?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and members of the press. My name is Larry Warren. 20 years ago, in 1980, I was a security specialist assigned to RAF Bentwaters, Woodbridge, NATO Air Force facilities in Suffolk, East Anglia.
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
Okay, I don't really need to reiterate the Larry Warren story here because you already know it. I mean, that voice will be very familiar to you because Larry has told this story many times, including on this channel. The Larry Warren and Rendlesham Forest video I very much recommend. It's where I went there with Larry and Tino, our other friend, and we went there and Larry told his story to you, the Hapanwo TV viewers. Of course, he's a figure that not everyone believes, and he's a figure who's been lied about an awful lot by many people, sometimes for purely personal reasons, just as they're taking advantage of the controversy to destroy him because they just don't like him for completely irrelevant reasons, completely irrelevant to ufology. But it's not going to go away, this story. The film Capel Green is still coming. I am in touch with people in the production team. I'll have a lot to say about it when the premiere comes along, and I will be covering it on this channel. Obviously, these things that get delayed. The movie industry is often like that, and you just got to be patient. So Larry is still 20 years later, he's still speaking out, and I think he will now for as long as he lives, until the truth comes out about what happened.
Hi, my name is George Filer III. I didn't believe in UFOs until London Control called us in the winter of 1962 and asked us, would we chase one? And we said, sure. So we let down from 30,000 feet to 1,000 feet where the UFO was hovering, and we went into a steep dive and actually exceeded the red line of the aircraft.
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
George Filey you'll be familiar with, because I talk about him in my History of Exopolitics video. What he just described is an incredibly dangerous manoeuvre. I mean, just think about it. I don't think you have to be a pilot. I mean, he is a pilot, which is, of course, why he's talking about it. But a very, very steep dive at high speed from a high altitude to a low altitude. If you misjudge your descent, you just fly straight into the ground. That's incredible. Obviously, again, London Control must have thought it very, very important that he did this. And there's many, many other people who've been in this situation. You know, Milton Torres and Parvez Jafari, that was the famous Tehran invasion in Iran. He was the pilot sent up to intercept a UFO, as Milton Torres was in England in 1957. Philo actually mentions Parvez Jafari in this particular occasion. And again, you see, we're not dealing with something non-existent, are we? It seems every time this happens, every time these things are talked about, it becomes less and less likely that what they're talking about is actually untrue.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Clifford Stone. I was a Sergeant First Class, United States Army. I was involved in situations where we actually did recoveries of crashed saucers, for lack of a better term, debris thereof. There were bodies that were involved with some of these crashes, also some were alive. While we were doing all this, we were telling the American public there was nothing to it. We were telling the world there was nothing to it.
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
As you saw earlier on, it was actually Clifford Stone that the BBC drew on the most in their particular article. They covered his story, probably because it's the most sensational. And I know Clifford is a controversial figure for what he talks about. However, it actually makes perfect sense. If once you accept that UFOs and crash retrievals are real, and I do, it would make perfect sense that the government would actually arrange a dedicated team of experts and professionals to carry out this unusual duty. It's something we can easily anticipate theoretically, and of course we don't just have, it's not just theoretically. Look what happened in Pentech, which I've talked about before. You have those Vodafone engineers with guns and guard dogs. Well, it's likely that these are part of some dark area of the Ministry of Defence, and these people are specially designed, specially intended, specially created, and specially established to deal with UFO crashes. And indeed, there's other people who've talked about it. Now, you know, Tony Dodd's mate, Tony Dodd, who passed away. Richard D. Hall, of course, tracked him down and went and interviewed him. Do you remember? If you watched the UFOs and NATO's video on Rich Planet. This is coming out everywhere. So whatever you think of Clifford Stone, and however outlandish his story appears to be, it's not really. It's actually quite logical.
Good morning. My name is Mark McCandlish, and for the last 21 years I have worked as a conceptual artist for a variety of defense contractors. I've been involved in conceptual artwork of the production thereof for Rockwell on the X-30 program. I witnessed and watched through a telescope a UFO which hovered over a nuclear weapons storage facility. A college buddy of mine, an associate by the name of Brad Sorensen, informed me that he had personally witnessed 3 flying saucers at a very large hangar at Norton Air Force Base during the course of an air show that was held on Saturday, November 12, 1988. A male staff member in Congressman Brown's office not only confirmed the exhibit, but the fact that there were 3 discs at that exhibit. These discs were hovering off the floor without any visible means of support. They were referred to as alien reproduction vehicles.
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
That's Mark McCandlish, who sadly passed away very recently, just a couple of weeks ago. While he's speaking there, Dr. Greer is standing beside him, holding up a big board with a picture of the alien reproduction vehicle on it. It's really interesting, the term alien reproduction vehicle. I mean, his story is very, very complicated, what happened, but basically he talks about aircraft and spacecraft that are being made on this Earth, and their design is based on the research done into salvaged extraterrestrial vehicles. And this is something, again, I've talked about in other videos in more detail. If you check the links in the description box, there'll be several. Both links, actually, I'll put 2 links there now, are going to be dealing with that. And I think it is something real. It's something we're going to have to deal with. Mark McCandless, who sadly passed away, again, like several others in this press conference, it's sad, he never got to see the full results of his endeavour, but I think we will.
Good morning. My name is Daniel Sheehan. I'm an attorney and serving as general counsel to the Disclosure Project. I met with her, and she informed me that President Carter, upon taking office in January of 1977, held a meeting with then the Director of Central Intelligence, who was George Bush Sr., and demanded that the Director of Central Intelligence turn over to the President the classified information about unidentified flying objects and the information that was in the possession of the United States intelligence community concerning the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence. This information was refused to the President of the United States by the Director of Central Intelligence, George Bush Sr.
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
The President of the United States was refused permission, but was overruled by the Director of Central Intelligence Agency. Now, of course, that name, George H.W. Bush, keeps coming up, and he does seem to be one of the most highly initiated US presidents in this particular era. Jimmy Carter, I think his interest in the subject may have come from the fact that he also had a UFO sighting before he was president. He was staying with Shirley MacLaine, who's an actress and who's very into UFOs, and they did witness something strange in the sky. He has talked about that. He's still alive, Carter, you know. He's pretty old. He's 90-something, but he's still alive. Danny Sheehan, who's got the best hairstyle, I think, in ufology. He's also witnessed... he also claims he witnessed photographs of a UFO crash retrieval. He's talked about this several times, and he's talked about how he tried to sneak out evidence from a particular library and was not allowed to. Danny Sheehan, I think I admire an awful lot for his defence of Dr. John Mack, when Mack was going to be kicked out of his position as a Harvard Don because he was a psychologist, and he dared to suggest that alien abductions and alien contact experiences were not just tricks of the mind. How dare he? See, people say, well, how do these secrets get kept? Why wouldn't everyone talk about it? No, they don't, because of this. It's because of peer pressure, it's because of conformity, it's because of the herding instinct. Just look at the Milgram experiment. It's been proved. Most people just obey. Most people will go along to get along. And a few courageous people won't do that, like Dr. John Mack. And he paid the enormous price professionally before he was sadly killed in an accident here in England.
Good morning. My name is Carol Rosen. In 1974, after being a 6th grade school teacher, I was introduced to the late Dr. Wernher von Braun in the U.S., the father of rocketry. In my first meeting with him, during that first 3.5 hours, he said to me, Carol, you will stop the weaponization of space.
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
This story is one I think you're very familiar with. I think this Carol Rosin is one of the most interesting and I think the most famous witnesses at that particular press conference. What she talks about, of course, is I'll hardly need to reiterate it, but Wernher von Braun, of course, was the designer of the V2 and V1 rockets for Germany in World War II, which were revolutionary and very, very advanced, far more advanced than anything the Allies had. Ballistic missiles, basically, liquid-fueled ballistic missiles, and jet-powered cruise missiles. And he was brought over to the United States to work on the space program after the war. And Carol got to know him. And he said this, he said interesting things because he talks, of course, about what he seems to predict. He predicted the end of the Cold War within a decade. Well, it was slightly over. I mean, it sort of wound down in the sort of mid to late 80s, but predicting. No one predicted the end of the Cold War. There was no signs in the mid 1970s that the Cold War was any way going to end. Was any way likely to end. He then said, then there'd be terrorists. Then there'd be meteorites from space. Of course, we do see stories about meteorites from space. Although I think they might be skipping that particular card, because then the last card is what? Fake alien invasion. And if you want to know more about that, watch my video with Steve Mumbling. Watch my reply to Steve Mumbling on the subject, because I go into that in detail there. But it's a very legitimate concern. It's absolutely correct. She's absolutely correct to be concerned about that. And as for stopping weaponization of space, the concern is that just the threat of aliens, evil aliens out there, would be enough to encourage people to put weapons in space. And the weapons in space could then be used, essentially, as weapons against people on Earth. It's the ultimate problem, reaction, solution, as David Icke calls it. It's the ultimate false flag. And the last card, if they're desperate, do you think they won't play the last card? Of course they will. And of course the aliens themselves are concerned about this. Dr. Bob Jacobs, who I also met, he was at the UFO Truth magazine conference. He described he had a job of photographing missile launches, and he photographed a missile launch, or actually a rocket, which is going to go into orbit, and it was basically blown up by a flying saucer, which fired beams of light at it. Now, if you watch UFOs and Nukes, it goes into that in detail. It's very, very good. Now, I've gone into this many times. In fact, Carol Rosin's actually quite approachable. I actually emailed her, and we ended up having a Skype conversation. And she's very open and approachable to people who want to talk to her. And if you have any questions for her, she'll probably get in touch with you about it, because she's leading this campaign to stop space weaponization. And well, it could be that will be absolutely essential. If the Illuminati indeed do plan to try and pull off a false flag alien invasion. And, Ian R. Crane, the late great Ian R. Crane, was talking about this just in a few years ago when the London Olympics was coming along. I think there's reason to believe that there was that card was going to be played during that particular tournament, and that it was aborted, maybe because of people like us, because of public awareness. I think when Nick Pope's article about it in the papers got published, I thought they'd given up on it because they're letting Nick Pope write about it. They're obviously not going to do it if Nick Pope is writing about it.
I'd like to thank each of the witnesses and for your patience. We're running about 50
It's just a Q&A session now. There are some interesting questions which I'm going to address.
50 minutes late. I want to emphasize that all of these witnesses each could speak for probably anywhere from 2 to 5 hours about what they have witnessed. We were trying to give you a snapshot. We have another 400 of these witnesses. I have carried this burden for 8 years. I'm now giving it to you, the American people and the people of the world, to take it forward.
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
I really do recommend, despite my criticism of him, I do really recommend Greer's the Disclosure Witness videos, because it's absolutely fascinating, because you see all the people you saw in that room during the press conference, but there's others, like he said. And there's so many of them, and there's a book which is basically almost a transcript of those particular series of interviews. He said he'd been carrying the burden for 8 years, and he's handing it over. Well, it's 28 years now, isn't it? Yeah. And so that's a point, isn't it? Bear in mind how much time has gone past since this press conference.
Yes, I wanted to know if there are laws in this country that in some way allowed this kind of secrecy or not. And then I wanted to know if there's a need to change any kind of law. And the next one I wanted to ask you, if you may, is who is profiting from this secrecy that maintains in secret the solution to the energy crisis?
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
Well, you see, you see, Greer talks about this. There was a legal framework in the early Cold War which you could say possibly justified secrecy, but basically they ran away. It got ran away with. It got picked up and run. And of course, its purpose wasn't to do with the Cold War. Its purpose was to do with the New World Order, which is why it precedes the Cold War. It precedes World War II. Even precedes World War One. As I've explained, if you look at Tesla and you look at the inventors from the Industrial Revolution, anti-gravity free energy were developed almost in the same way that coal power, steam power, and petrol were developed. Petrol-powered engines were developed too. There's distinct reason to believe the truth embargo goes back at least to the late 19th century. Look at the way Tesla was suppressed and things like that. Some of Tesla's papers from 1898, the experiments he did in 1898, were classified. They were classified, they're still classified to this day.
Yeah, let me get to those, okay, quickly, because we are short on time. First of all, I think initially there was an appropriate national security apparatus in place in the 40s during the Truman and also Eisenhower years. By the late Eisenhower years, we have a testimony from Brigadier General Stephen Lubkin, still a practicing attorney.
So Greer's kind of repeating what I said, which is probably because I was watching him.
That by the late
I could have cut that bit out.
Eisenhower years, that he had lost control of these projects primarily because of the compartmentalization into the military-industrial complex.
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
Okay, I'll leave that bit in because you can listen to it. But the privatization issue is an important point because, like everything else with government, this has been outsourced. And when things are outsourced, the reason the government doing it, one of the reasons, is because it reduces accountability. It means the laws are different. For example, if they want to pull the troops out of Afghanistan and Iraq or Bosnia, they do it. They pull the troops out, but they leave behind mercenaries. And they say, look, we're pulling the troops out. We're not involved in this anymore. But they have these civilian contractors left over who are basically doing the same job that the troops were doing. These constabulary missions and things like that. So that's an example of it. Also, of course, in the NHS, and now I've got a personal experience of this, the various services were privatised, which meant that it was more convenient. It means that various rules and regulations could be bypassed on the technicality that you're dealing with a private company and the state doing its own work. You know, President Eisenhower had said, "Beware the military-industrial complex." It's interesting that he did that because he was talking to John F. Kennedy just before then. And of course Kennedy, then his successor, then gets assassinated. Remember Mr. Cooper, that old guy with the he had the nasal specs with oxygen on because he was so ill. I don't know if he's still alive now, probably not. But that interview we did with Richard Dolan, he said that Eisenhower was going to invade Area 51. But is Area 51 not part of the United States? Well, look, according to the lawyer who dealt with the Frost lawsuit, he said no. It's just, you know, there's no oversight. We already know that the head of the CIA can overrule the President of the United States. That's the swamp, you see. That is the swamp that Trump was in. That Trump got into and tried to drain. But he did try as much as he could. But you see, this is why people say, well, Trump must be an insider because he didn't drain the swamp. Do you know how difficult it is to drain that kind of swamp? Eisenhower was suggesting an armed invasion of Area 51. So is Area 51, if there's no congressional oversight, no executive oversight, no judicial oversight, is it actually part of the United States at all? Or is it an enclave of some kind of super government? Because that's what the lawyer said with the Frost lawsuit. I remember the documentary about it. And if Eisenhower's using the armed forces to invade Area 51, then yeah, an enclave of some kind of global super government. I think that's fair to say.
Operative word industrial. There are corporations such as SAIC, Lockheed Martin, Northrop, and others that deal specifically with this issue, with advanced energy and propulsion systems connected to UFOs. And I think that what has happened, from the best we can tell, from insiders that have briefed me for now about 8 years, is that we have lost control of these projects from a constitutional law perspective because the infrastructure within military intelligence and corporate channels is so well funded and so complex and labyrinthine that there are compartments within compartments within compartments, and people who are in the Congress who make inquiries, and in fact President Clinton, when he made inquiries, were simply denied access, as you heard earlier that President Carter was denied access.
I just want to know if anybody at the UN is looking into this.
I personally met with Boutros Ghali's wife, Aliyah Ghali, who said that her husband was quite concerned about this. This was in the 1990s. Since then, we know that there have been other people at the UN who've made inquiries. The problem is the UN has no mandate to deal with this. It needs to be given a mandate from its constituent member nations.
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
Well, look, if you watch regularly my channel, you'll know that's not true. Because many, many times I've talked about the Gary Initiative, which was cut short abortively, in the same way that unfortunately this was, as I'll describe more in a minute. But the Gary Initiative resulted, that is Sir Eric Gary, the Prime Minister of Grenada, this little island in the Caribbean. Such, so small and insignificant, but at the same time so groundbreaking. It was led by this incredible man, this incredible, free-thinking, open-minded, maverick kind of guy. And it's resulted in the UN Resolution 33/426 on the 18th of December 1978, which distinctly said that the UN should commit itself to organising the research of UFOs. So what Greer said is incorrect, and surely he knows this. He's mentioned the the Gary Initiative before, so surely he knows that's the case. I wonder why he said what he did. So the UN does have a mandate. Indeed, Javier Perez de Cuellar, as you know, again, if you watch regularly, he witnessed, or some of his people witnessed an alien abduction. Now, independent witnesses of alien abductions are very rare, but this could be one of those events. He was did he come before Boutros Ghali? I don't know. I don't know what the succession is of the United Nations Secretary General, but Perez de Cuellar was one of them.
So I think my question is actually to Clifford Stone. You said that you had seen aliens on a craft that had crashed. I wondered if you could describe what they looked like.
I could, but it would probably take a whole lot of time. The reason I state that, when I got out in 1989, we had cataloged 57 different species.
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
And again, that's something the BBC have to bring up, don't they? But the thing about it is, it's true. There is a whole taxonomy of aliens. There's the greys, large, medium, small. There's the Nordics. There's the mantids. There's all kinds of things, and they're seen everywhere. Different people independently, including people in different cultures in many parts of the world, see the same beings, which indicates that they're not a figment of your imagination. So it's not something we should laugh at. Of course, the BBC are going to make a joke about it, like they make a joke about everything to do with us. But they shouldn't.
Deanne Divis with United Press International. Could you please address the vehicle that there was a drawing displayed of? Why would this vehicle be on display at an air show? What is the power source that you are asserting is going to be so very useful? And how can you determine that this vehicle is not something that is being developed, by a government agency?
In fact, I think that was the testimony. This is an alien reproduction vehicle, and just to be clear, this means that it is based on advanced anti-gravity and zero-point energy propulsion systems. Those are the propulsion systems. They are being manufactured by a consortium of companies that include Lockheed Martin, Northrop, SAIC, and other corporations.
Greer is holding up the placard again with the alien reproduction vehicle on it.
They do have superluminal capacity, in other words, faster than the speed of light capacity.
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
Now, the faster than light thing, faster than light travel, of course, is a science fiction concept. But it's possible we don't understand light completely. I mean, they're already talking about the variable speeds of light, things like that. So maybe that's the case. Obviously, if something's going to travel vast distances across the universe, you need some way of breaking that barrier. The alien reproduction vehicle, see, it's interesting that it's not just a code word. Mark McCandless talks about how these are made by human hands. They're aircraft made by human hands, but then they're not literally alien, but they're based on the technology that has been gathered. It's basically been back engineered from salvaged remains of real alien craft. It's a good question about the air show. I mean, McCandless did say it was at a hangar in an air show, but you'd think that it wouldn't be kept anywhere near a damn air show, wouldn't you? Though, funnily enough, it's interesting actually. Nick Cook talks about this in his book. No, it's here somewhere. But the Hunt for Zero Point is very worth reading if you've not read it. It's buried under some more books there. If you've not read The Hunt for Zero Point by Nick Cook, it's worth reading because, funnily enough, there's some really, really old magazines and newspapers, and even some scientific journals, which have pictures of they're like futuristic visions, which include anti-gravity craft. And it seems that in the past, engineers were interested in anti-gravity and developing it. You get the Byfield-Brown effect and things like that. And then sometime, and Cook puts it very precisely, I think, in 1951, it just stopped. It just ended. It meant so either that's, the skeptics will say, well, it ended because it didn't work. It's just a silly science fiction folly. It's just it's a scientific dead end. It's a cul-de-sac, an engineering cul-de-sac. So they just abandoned it, and they focused on building fixed-wing aircraft, helicopters, hot air balloons, and all the things we're so familiar with today. But it could be it just went black budget, which means it became classified. It was simply classified. Is that the possibility?
Thank you. My name is Murray Felsher. I publish a newsletter downstairs here called the Washington Remote Sensing Letter that deals with reconnaissance and surveillance of the Earth from space. My question is this. Since 1972, with the launch of Landsat 1, and now with the launch of commercial space imagery, there are some archived, I would say, upwards of 35 million photographs of the Earth from space. And not one of them has shown a flying saucer. Are you suggesting that these have been airbrushed out?
We're suggesting that there is a system before the public gets hold of anything that's off of a government-connected satellite. There is a compartmented operation that does indeed sanitize them from this type of evidence. And I think the testimony of the gentleman who was with the Defense Intelligence Agency, Mr. Maynard, Ms. Hare, and others would substantiate that. We have other witnesses who have been involved in projects where such items have been sanitized out. It could also be that if you did a thorough search, you might find a few that slipped through. We obviously haven't had the research dollars to go through all the millions of images that are cataloged to look for them, but we do know there's been a very thorough sanitizing of this. And people should not be naive about the extent to which covert programs using billions of our tax dollars have been able to effectively hide this. This is one of the sort of myths of both the media and the public. It's sort of a Pollyanna myth that we live in a society where such things could not be done. In fact, they are done, and we can prove that they have been done.
These entire proceedings here, and I'm wondering how your screening process went. Can you tell us a little bit about your satisfaction level with that?
How much well you can hear that. He talks about the screening process. In other words, how does he vet the witnesses?
Well, I'm very satisfied that these are genuine and good people who are speaking truthfully. Out of 400 people that I'm dealing with, not 20 times this number, have I been fooled? Yeah. I'm an emergency doctor. Let me say something. People come into the emergency department with flank pain, writhing on a stretcher. What have they got? A kidney stone, right? Yeah, well, some of them go into the bathroom, prick their finger, and squeeze blood into the water.
I was using a medical
the urine sample to show that they have blood in their urine.
I should have cut that.
Because you've been scammed once or twice. The top secret witnesses, the insiders, willing to testify under oath before Congress that this is true. Now, here's another.
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
Well, I can't really add anything to that. He kind of just said that that he has looked into all this and he checks all the witnesses out. It's not what Greer says about the witnesses; it's listening to them speak for themselves, who I think is very interesting. I personally have spoken myself to several of those witnesses. I've got to know one of them, Larry Warren, very well as a close personal friend. This can't be ignored. I mean, he's absolutely right about this. I mean, I don't want to take anything away from Greer when it comes to this press conference. He did a damn good job. Nearly at the end now.
The key point. Some of the people who are in this witness pool, Mr. Sheehan, myself, and a couple of other attorneys, are members of state licensed professions.
That's an important point, which I brought up earlier on. You know, it's not like they haven't got an awful lot to lose if they start saying silly things. And of course, if Captain Bob Salas started thinking silly things, we'd all have an awful lot to lose, wouldn't we?
What that means is that if we are perpetrating a hoax, we will lose our license to practice medicine, we will lose our license to practice law, because we'll be perpetrating a hoax upon the public. So what I would say to you is that the group of people before you are very credible, and the others whom we have identified are. We are not the CIA, we have not been able to do a $50,000 background check on each person. I'll give you that caveat. But we have done very serious interviews and vetting, and by the way, these people have presented their DD-214s,
the DD-214 is basically your discharge papers from the military if you're a military serviceman in the United States.
Defense forms, other documentation that show the two DD-214s and others that show that they were in the military at a certain place and a certain time. So we're very comfortable that, in fact, that the weight of the testimony will carry the day here and that this is real.
Oh, John Cipher just comes up to him. He sidles up to Greer when he's in mid-speech. Don't interrupt Dr. Steven Greer when he's talking. Oh.
I had an insight, and it relates to your question. There have been tens of thousands of sightings and experiences from all over the world.
More millions. Millions, John.
Only one of them needs to be true. Because if only one of them is true, then the entire case, the non-reality of these sightings, falls apart.
That's absolutely true. I mean, David Griffin made this point when he was interviewed by Tristan Swale, who is a skeptic who I used to get on with, but he just turned against me completely. He carried out an unprovoked attack against me, and now he just called me names, called me a racist. I've covered this on her Panama Voice, but he interviewed David Griffin, and Griffin made this point: if only one of these UFO sightings or these UFO events are real, then that's it for the skeptic position. UFOs are real, aliens are real, but of course many, many more than one are real. Well, with UFO sightings, I mean, according to research, some people say 33% are inexplicable of reported sightings. Some say it's 95%. The UFO book which I had when I was a kid said 33%.
Evidence out of the public domain, yes. A priori, all signed agreements and oaths that have flowed from such operations are null and void. What that means is, in legal theory, is that if it's an illegal enterprise, the agreements those that are entered into as a result of that illegal enterprise have no legal standing. So one of the things I would like to announce today is all of the men and women listening to this need to know they are free to speak. We are declaring all national security oaths on this subject null and void. They have flowed from illegal operations that have no standing constitutional.
Even though I am, without question, a believer in UFO reality.
Well, you see, Greer and the Disclosure Project can declare that. They can declare that any security oaths related to the ET truth embargo are null and void. But it's not their decision, is it? It's the decision of the authorities, in the state and corporate authorities. But he's absolutely right. I mean, Dolan and Zabel actually suggest this in ADR to Disclosure. And they go into this in detail about how there needs to be some kind of Truth and Reconciliation Commission and an amnesty for people who are involved in the truth embargo. The only way to move forward is to kind of is to find some way to have hearings and kind of put it behind us. And for that reason, the people who took security oaths to keep quiet about UFOs need to be relieved of the legal accountability, which could result in terrible things, imprisonment, even murder. They need to be relieved of that. They need to be relieved of that burden. So it's absolutely right. I mean, if we were ever in a disclosure capital D situation, that's what would be necessary. But Greer saying that, I mean, Greer, I'm not one of these people who say Stephen Greer's a shill. He's a shill. He's working for the for the guy. I don't say things like that because it's that, you know what I think about this shill culture. I don't. I think he means well, but he's basically saying this is what we would like to happen, not we are declaring it. Because I think if someone did go on a disclosure project press conference and they broke their oaths, they could not go to court or could not be pulled up in front of a court martial and say, well, you know, Dr. Greer said it would be okay. That's not a defense, is it?
My people, my mother's family, who fought in the American Revolution, were prisoner of war with the British to help found this country, did not fight and die to form the United States so that this kind of chicanery can go on. So these men are free to speak, and there can be no legal repercussions against them. We have legal counsel who will also support this theory, and we're taking this to other constitutional scholars. It is time for that game to end. It is time for a new era in the human experience. Yes.
With a summary of requested actions, full open congressional hearings on the UFO subject. I mean, he's right. I mean, of course, Danny Sheehan, I don't know if he's still working with Greer, but he is a trained solicitor, and we know he will back people up if they're caught in a corner and they're suffering professional repercussions for being intellectually honest about this particular issue. And he's already done it with John Mack. John Mack was a tenured Harvard professor. And what he went through is incredible. I mean, even like the social pressure put on him, you know, like people just wouldn't speak to him. He would go, his colleagues and friends just turned against him. He used to walk into the cafeteria at Harvard University and they just sort of sit there and they turn their back on him. I mean, this sort of thing can break a person's spirit more than anything else. I mean, I think it was Septimus Severus, actually, one of the Caesars of Rome. He said something very interesting. Most men would rather face an army than the scorn of their peers. And that's very true. And some of the brave people who do speak out, they need protection. They do. And that's an admirable thing. But what clout does the Disclosure Project really have to grant them that? I think the only way they can grant them that is by giving them a platform so they speak out so loudly that if anything goes wrong to them, if they fall under a bus, no one's going to believe it. This is essentially what Bob Lazar talked about. Essentially, Bob Lazar states that this is why he went public. Just simply to protect himself. It's sort of like basically, if anyone touches me, everyone's going to know because I've been in the news, that sort of things. So the people who would have given him a hard time simply say, well, that's not worth it. Just let him talk, People will think he's nuts. They probably chose on that strategy instead. On May the 9th, 2001, the UFO Disclosure Press Conference for 2 hours in the National Press Club took over the internet. It must have seemed, I mean, I wasn't there. I know this guy who goes to Probe. He was there. He witnessed the whole thing. And I wonder what it would have been like to sit in that audience and watch that. I mean, I wish I'd got involved in UFOs earlier on, actually, because I would have probably gone there myself. Just imagine how heady that would be, how the enormous energy of it. You can detect it. I detected the same thing at the Citizen hearing. It must have seemed just like this is the beginning of the end of the truth embargo. This is the domino that's going to topple all the others. It must have felt like that. A real momentum was initiated with that event. But it, of course, as we know, was not to be. And after 20 years looking back at it, it's all the more poignant, isn't it? And it's not because Greer was a shill. He did that deliberately to help the truth embargo. It's not because of that. It's because of something that happened a few months later. On September the 11th of that year, everything was shaken like a kaleidoscope and reset, as to quote the evil-eyed and creepy smile of Tony Blair. Now, was 9/11 done because of this? Well, no, probably that might have been a factor, but I mean, things like 9/11 are often done for more than one reason, and it could be that was a factor. I mean, I talk about how the Gary Initiative was derailed in exactly the same way in March of 1979, because what happened? It's just a few months after that amazing UN resolution for the United Nations to set up a official ufological body to investigate this sort of thing. And then Gary, basically Maurice Bishop took power in Grenada, and it was basically a coup. There was a coup d'etat in Grenada. Gary was exiled. He was deposed. Bishop announced himself Prime Minister for life. And Gary had to drop everything and sort that out. He had to sort out this business in his own country, which took the best part of 5 years. And by the time that was all sorted out, by the time that was over, it was actually the Americans who invaded and got rid of the whole thing. The impetus had been lost. And since 9/11 happened, the impetus for the press conference on May the 9th was lost. However, has it been lost forever? Is it the question? I mean, obviously some of you are going to be yelling at the screen, right? Yelling at your monitor screens right now, saying, Ben, you should just ignore this. It's all evil. It's all rubbish. You shouldn't be celebrating this. Well, it's not a celebration. Marking this 20th anniversary is definitely not a celebration. If anything, it's a bit of a lament, because if I'd been sitting in that audience back then, like my friend was who went there, if someone told me 20 years down, someone came from the future and said 20 years' time, nothing's going to happen. Nothing's going to happen now, next 20 years, I'm afraid. Would I have just scoffed and walked out? Sometimes it's better not to know these things. And we don't know the future. However, in 2013 there was the citizen hearing, which actually was a far more ambitious and I think far-reaching and I think more effective event like this than the 2001 press conference. Partly because of course, the internet has evolved enormously since then. I mean, there was a huge live stream. It's interesting that the live stream in 2013 was also, I don't think it was the biggest live stream. It was watched all over the world. I watched it too. And as luck would have it, this is just because of the time difference between myself and the US Eastern time. I could watch all of it because it kind of began just when I was finishing work. In 2023, it'll be the 10-year anniversary of that, and I'll be doing an awful lot for that, I can tell you. You see, I think we're entering a period of opportunity. We are now in a period of opportunity. Ever since 2016, and Trump becoming US president, and Brexit happening, and all these other things that have gone on, we are in a period of opportunity. If just for a few months the Illuminati completely lost control of all the political structures of this particular planet. Just for a few months. They clawed it back, but the effect of 2016 is still there. The COVID-19 pandemic is there 2016, as I explained in my pub video. It's their answer to that. This is a war. This is a battle. We're going head to head with these guys, if indeed they are guys and not reptilians. But look what else is happening in the world. Look at the ATIP TTSA stuff, right? It's not just disinformation. There may be disinformation in it, but it's pretty clear that the way the Illuminati are dealing with the UFO subject changed very radically after 2016. So by December 2017, there's a completely new policy after 70 years since the Cutler-Twining memo in 1947. Their universal policy, which they never deviated from, which they accepted absolutely unanimously and without waiver, they shoved it in the bin and said we're going to have to do something different. Why is that? Is it because the truth embargo has lost power? Is the TTSA stuff, is it because the truth embargo really is losing ground and it can no longer prevent things like from happening? Or is this some kind of controlled disclosure which is designed just to move us into a different era of tighter and continued UFO secrecy, and indeed the fake alien invasion scenario? Because both of those outcomes are possible right now. I don't know. UFO Jesus, the guy who does the timestamp markers I put in, check out his channel, Post Disclosure World. He's just uploaded a video calling, it's basically the, what's it called? I've just been watching it actually. You can find it on his channel. Maybe just go to my history, because he's just, it's called, I can't find it now. UFO, oh here we are, UFO Disclosure Update. That's it.
When it comes to trimming your balls, always use the right tool.
Okay. UFO
Manscaped is the only
Disclosure
men's
Update.
brand dedicated to below the waist grooming and
Sorry, my
hygiene.
bruiser,
Some of
my
us
browser.
have let our downstairs go.
So what happened there? I don't know. It's called UFO Disclosure Update, May 2021. That was an awful lot of effort just to find you a video. But do check it out, because he talks about Miraculous May. He's got this phrase, which is Miraculous May. Because he thinks this month, and it's only the 5th, it's now the 5th of May, about 2 a.m, and I'm getting tired. The 5th of May, we're only just at the start of the month. This month's going to be special, he thinks. Maybe that famous flying triangle video that everyone's been going on about, which is supposedly meant a picture of a very close triangular shaped UFO captured by a pilot. If it's see, triangular shaped ones are sometimes not, that some of them are alien, but some of them are also ARVs, like the TR-3B and things like that. Whichever it is, it's something remarkable if it exists. If this photo exists, obviously the thing with the green triangles, which has just been released and been confirmed, which I talk about in the last video, that may be, it could be Mick West is right about that, which is a shame, but it could be. But then that doesn't mean there's not more out there, because I'm sure there is. I'm sure there is, because it could be by the end of the month we'll know a lot more than we do now. It could be that the 20th anniversary of this Disclosure Project press conference could be the very moment that we tip the critical mass and something happens which we haven't expected, something that may vindicate those who've kept faith with this disclosure process, as I tried to, despite my misgivings. Something that will disprove the cynics and the shillheads and the "hey man, I've been there's" and everyone, everyone's stupid except me crowd, the shill posers I call them, the "hey man, I can see through the disinformation and you can't" posers. Something will disprove them as well. I hope so. So that was it. Well, it's not. I was going to say that's it. That's the 20th anniversary marked for the Disclosure Project press conference 2001, but it's not, because on the 9th, that's this Sunday coming, I'm going to do a live stream. I'll put up a notice beforehand, as always. I was thinking about maybe doing it at 5 p.m. British Summer Time rather than 7 p.m. the usual. That'd be okay. It's a Sunday afternoon. Would that suit you guys? Let me know in the comments. The thing is, I'd like Steve Mumbling to join, because of course he lives, it's 3 a.m. where he is when it's 7 p.m. here. Or maybe that's changed because of the change in clock. I don't know. But it could be 1 p.m. It could be 1 a.m. instead of 3 a.m. So Steve, you can stay up for that, because I think your input would be very useful, because you disagree so much, but you provide a lot of source material for me, so it'd be great if you could join a live stream just this once. And as for the rest of you, I hope you will too. So do please check out the next video that goes up. Probably will be the notice for the Sunday live stream. Well, there may be another video between now and then. I don't know. Probably not. But I think this is quite enough for you to digest during that period, isn't it? But anyway, thank you very, very much. I hope you have a nice 20th anniversary of whatever it is you want to do. And I'll see you again at the live stream, probably, if not before. Thank you for watching Hapanwo TV. Hospital Porters, Pride and Dignity. Stop the New World Order.